Very welcome everyone to Charlie Bird's Bookshop, where we're going to be chatting to Sarah Webb about her brand new book, The Little Bee Charmer of Henrietta Street. I'm so excited to get this book. I've been waiting for this for a long time. My own parents, my dad is from Dublin, and his father, my granddad, would have grown up on Little Denmark Street, and my grandmother grew up on Benburg Street in one of the tenements there. So I've got such a special graw for the Bee Charmer on Henrietta Street, and I've been so excited to read it from when I heard about it and talk about it with Thursday now. So you're very welcome.
Skin in the game, as they say, Méabh.
Exactly. Exactly. And what first inspired you to write the story? What was your first spark?
Well, a couple of years ago, I visited the Tenement Museum at 14 Henrietta Street, and it was kind of in the back. I kept it in the back of my head for a little while because obviously the tenements, although they were wonderful communities to grow up in, for some children and adults it could be difficult, you know. So I kind of was looking for a kind of a way to balance that out in a way, and then in 2000, it must have been 2019, because it was before the current COVID situation. I was at a conference for festival programmers in Amsterdam, which was absolutely wonderful, and I met a wonderful woman who was a professor of circus. And I'm a very curious person, Méabh. So I was sitting beside her one evening and I was just quizzing her about her work and about circuses. And she comes from a carnival background, Irish carnival background. And she was telling me about the history of circus in Ireland. And she told me about Patty Astley, who was a bee charmer back in the late 18th century, and her husband Philip Astley, who set up the second circus in the world in Dublin. And I just I found this fascinating, so I looked it up and read lots more about the circus in Ireland, and I discovered that the travelling circus was a big part of Irish life way back, but certainly around the early 1900s, which is a period of history in Ireland that I'm really interested in, that we might talk about a bit, because so much changed for both children and women around that time in particular. And obviously, of course, Ireland. But for me, you know, history, I love finding kind of personal stories and finding a way into history. So I started thinking, wow, you know, there were circuses in used to pitch just outside Dublin City, and tenement children used to sneak in under the canvas of the tents. And I thought, gosh, that's really interesting. And then kind of a light bulb went off in my head, and I went, wow, that's a really good way into telling the story of the tenements, and adding a little bit of kind of lightness and wonder to the story. So that is a long way of saying that's where the two strands came from, the tenement strand and the circus strand. I got really interested in Irish history, particularly when I was researching Blazing a Trail, which is my book about amazing Irish women. And I read so many, and Dare to Dream, I read about so many brilliant women, I suppose like Rosie Hackett, who grew up in inner city Dublin. So I just got really interested in it. And so that's where the novel came from.
Okay. And so those two stories coming together, that inspired you to tell the story of Eliza, who is the little bee charmer of Henrietta Street. Where did the inspiration for Eliza herself come from? She's this small little talented artist whose life changes very dramatically at the beginning of the story. So she's in this whole new world and introduces the reader to this whole new world that she's discovered. Was there a particular kind of inspiration for her specifically?
Well, yes, you're absolutely right. Eliza and her brother Jonty, Eliza's 13 and her brother Jonty is 10. And they move from, at the very beginning of the book, so this isn't just spoiler, they move from a very leafy red brick area in Rathmines, from a very middle class kind of background, to the inner city. They moved to 16 Henrietta Street. to a tenement flat. And I wanted to have that kind of, so a young reader could see what was happening and the tenements and the circus through Eliza's eyes, and kind of witness and experience some of the things that happen in the book, which are difficult in the tenement, through her eyes. Things like rats and cockroaches and the lack of loos, which kids are always fascinated. They always want to talk about the toilets. And just there's an accident in the tenements. So I knew early on that I wanted to have a family moving from a middle class background to a tenement background. And then I tend to always write about girls who are my main characters. In all my children's novels so far have been girls up between the ages of 11 and 14, because it's an age that I'm really, really interested in, that I remember vividly, because so much changes for girls around that time, no matter what time they lived in. Although modern children are not out working at 13 or 14, which there would have been in 1911. So that age group, I love that age group because they're really, I like writing about really strong, brave girls. Yeah, so Eliza, I guess, yeah, I had good fun writing about her. She just came to me as fully formed. So I just saw her, she's long dark hair, she's plucky and strong, but she does tend to say the wrong things sometimes, and she's very impulsive. Yeah, so she just came to me fully formed, as did her little brother, which is great for a writer when that happens.
Yeah, because as you said there, Eliza is a character who, she's very impulsive, she's very passionate, she's very talented, she kind of she isn't afraid to be herself. And I felt like all of those were traits that kids of any era can completely identify with. So kind of what did inspire you to set it in 1911?
Well, that particular year I chose because there was a census in 1911. I'm fascinated by kind of social history, and I spent far too long reading all the census details, which are online, from 1911. So you can find out like exactly who lived on Henrietta Street, how many people lived in how many rooms, how much rent they were paying, what their work was, what religion they were. It's really fascinating stuff. How much rent they paid was fascinating, just to see the difference. So I always thought, before doing the research, I thought the tenements were just very working class, very Catholic, very Irish, but actually there were loads of people living in the tenements from Scotland, from England, from France, from Germany, which I hadn't expected to find. And there were, within one room, there might have been a family plus other people from their family, plus 1, 2, 3, 4 lodgers, which was fascinating. And it told you also the occupation, and it told you if they were a lodger. I would recommend, if anyone's interested in history, like, do look up the census. So anyway, I had all this wealth of information, and it also tells you exactly how many people live in the buildings at that time. So for example, in some of the Henrietta Street houses in 1911, there were over 100 people living in them. You know, that's in one building, which was designed for one family with their staff. So that was extraordinary. So it just made it all come alive to me. So that's why I chose that date. And then I was very lucky to find this book by Katrina Crowe, which is called Dublin 1911, and it's based on the census. And Katrina Crowe very cleverly breaks it down into loads of different sections, and she talks about things like nature in 1911, clothes in 1911. She talks about the census as well, you know, what women would have worn, the scandal of wearing trousers in 1911, and these are all things that I was able to build the book.
And yeah, Eliza did into that.
yeah, Eliza puts on overalls and it's quite shocking to her because she's never ever worn trousers before, even though she's 13. I think I've done a couple of events already around the book, and the children find this extraordinary that people didn't, that girls and boys didn't wear trousers. Both wear trousers in 1911, but it's only really in the 60s and 70s that women in Ireland started wearing trousers, which I find extraordinary. I don't know about you. I'm wearing trousers now. I like to have a choice, Méabh. I like skirts and dresses, but I like to have a choice. And often if I'm working, I'll wear whatever is most useful for that day. But not to have a choice in 1911. But sure, they weren't even going to school, a lot of the girls. So
yeah, of course.
Women weren't voting, so it was a very different time,
I thought I really liked that idea at the beginning of the story where Eliza is annoyed that her brother gets to continue to go to school and she doesn't, and he's equally wonderfully kind of 10-year-old boy going, why do I have to go to school?
I want to go. I know. Yeah, but I think I really like the Anna Carey books. I don't know if you've read Molly on the March. And there's a great scene in it where her brother gets all the best bits of chicken. Do you remember that? They're at dinner and her brother, Molly's brother, is getting all the best bits of chicken because he's boy and she's girl and she doesn't. And that sense of injustice was very strong in me as a child because I had a brother and he got to choose first what bits of chicken he got. Like, I say it to my parents now and they go, oh, you were imagining that. But luckily I have two sisters who back me up. But in some families, traditionally, girls and boys would have been treated very differently. And in 1911, that was definitely the case. Yeah, definitely.
That's me. And I remember, like, there's such a sense of both time and place throughout the book, which I really loved. Like Dublin itself, I really felt like Dublin feels like a character in the book. It's so much, the sense of place is so key to the story. Like, was that something that you were trying to evoke? Like,
oh, very well. Thank you, Méabh. That's very kind. Very much so. So, this is the first historic fiction I've written for children. And I was really wanted to get it right. So I spent pretty much a year researching first. So I read novels of the time or a little bit later. I read Strumpet City, I read The Charwoman's Daughter, I looked at the dialogue, I looked at how they described the city at the time. Then I looked at a lot of photos. I watched Strumpet City, which you can find bits of on YouTube. I watched a terrific series on TV3 all about the tenements. It was about a family who used to live in the tenements when they were young children going back to stay there, but it had loads of the history and I read books, I read newspapers from the time. So I really immersed myself in it. And then I stopped, wrote the first draft, and then I checked the fine details, like how much was the tram in 1911? How much of someone's income would that have been? The tram was actually quite expensive. Those kind of, how much is food in 1911? How much is that? So food was expensive as well, and coal and sugar. And so, but I had to work all that out, those fine details. But that kind of getting the atmosphere for the city, there's lots of wonderful photographs available of the time. So I just immersed myself in it and I became Eliza. I always think I don't really write for children, I write through the eyes of a child, if that makes sense. I'm not writing for anyone really, I'm just writing Eliza's story, and she happens to be 13, and she happens to be 13 in 1911. But I'm delighted now you felt that was immersive. And I got a wonderful woman who is a historian, she's Dublin City's historian in residence, to read the first, an early draft, just to check the history bits. So I made changes after that. She was really interesting because at one stage I had someone's face, that she had stitches, and then she went back to work and she said, gosh, no, like in those days, like having a gash on your face, like that would be work stopping almost, because they didn't have the same medicine as we do now. So lots of little, and she was saying things like leaflets weren't called, you know, she gave me the correct names.
Yeah.
That was invaluable. So yeah, so I hope all that background work and all the work, it's like a swan. You see this lovely elegant swan and then you don't see all the paddling going on underneath as the research gets kind of more and more and more detailed and focusing on all the tiny, and I'm sure there's a couple of things that I've got wrong, and I'm sure some of the words in the dialogue aren't quite what they would have used in 1911, but I also wanted to make it a really good story and very accessible for young readers. That was important to me.
Yeah, because I think that really comes across, that it's a very, what I would call a very welcoming story, where you're able to sink in and listen to Eliza's story, even though she does come from a completely different time era, and she's still, like, she has passions and ambitions, and then of course incredible adventures when she meets the people of the circus, Albert and Madame Ada, and what kind of, you mentioned there Patsy Astley, who inspired, I assume inspired Madame Ada. Like I loved Madame Ada in the story. She's just such a wonderful character. Like, I never even knew Be Charming was a thing.
I know.
So it's such an incredible thing.
I had great fun researching Be Charming. I went right down the rabbit hole. So Be Charming is basically bee bearding, some people call it, but it's basically you take the queen. So most bees, well, all bees, pretty much all worker bees are female. There are drones, which are male bees, but once they fertilize the queen, they pretty much die. So, which I was fascinated by, that all the worker bees are female, you know. Their queen runs, basically lays all the eggs, and she doesn't generally leave the hive. And so all the worker bees, all the bees are connected to the queen bee, and they smell, she has a very strong smell, and they can sense and smell her smell. So what they do at Be Charming is you take the queen out of the hive and you put her in a little cage, and then it's put around the bee charmer's neck, and then all the worker bees swarm around the bee charmer, creating a muff, like a scarf of tiny little bees, thousands and thousands of them. It sounds terrifying, but I've watched loads and loads of videos of people doing it, and it's so interesting. If you want to spend a very happy while, Méabh, look up Be Charming. And then I was delighted to see, I don't know if you can see on the cover, I'll put it up really close. If you look at Madame Ada on the cover, she has the bees all around her neck. So Rachel managed to do a beautiful job with Madame Ada on the cover. So yeah, she was very much inspired by Patty Astley. And I wanted, because Méabh doesn't have a mother, I wanted to give her kind of a kind of parent figure, because her own father really isn't supporting her, but he has his own problems, because at the very beginning of the book he is going blind basically unless he has an operation. Yeah, so I really enjoyed writing Madame Ada. She's Italian because my dear friend Tanya has fluent Italian. So Tanya did all the little, she has like all these little Italian phrases and little bits and pieces. So my friend Tanya translated all those for me. Yeah, but she was good fun to create or write Madame Ada.
I love the impact that music made on the Be Charming, and how the fact that she was a singer and had this background in music, that came into her talent with the bees. Again, that's something I never would have thought of, but makes total sense when you think about vibrations and how much bees work off of vibrations and sound waves in the air.
Yeah, I know it is. And it's funny, it was only really after I wrote the first draft that I started thinking about how the community of bees is a little bit like the community of the tenements, that everyone working together, looking after each other, very, very strong women, you know, strong matriarchs. Yeah, so that kind of, and lots of workers, lots of people working very hard to support the system, you know. So that kind of And then I started, yeah, so there's lots of little tiny little bee things that are in there that you might not even notice. Yeah, so Jonty and Eliza see the circus. They see the poster first, and then they see the parade that the circus used to promote their circus. And then they, well, I won't give any spoilers, but they get involved with the circus because of Jonty's bravery, and they're offered a job. So they go and work in the circus in the evenings, but their father doesn't know about this. But yeah, I really enjoyed researching and writing the circus scenes, especially between Jonty and Albert, or sorry, Eliza and Albert, because they kind of have a kind of friendship, and you know, there's a little bit of, I think, kind of very innocent flirting going on there as well. But Albert's a sweet character. But I had great fun researching early circuses, you know, really, really interesting.
Yeah, because there's so many, like, between animals and talented people. I loved how, in some ways, when Eliza first gets her glimpse kind of behind the curtain of the circus, and she's kind of disappointed by how normal everyone is, and how just everyone's just at work, and she's going, oh. But I loved how it normalized, this is these people's everyday lives. This is what they do every day. This is their normal.
Yeah, yeah, I know. And the magic was kind of in the ring. They were creating magic for the audience. And then they were, and a lot of it, you know, a lot of circus life is training. I mean, they're athletes, you know, so they don't just go up and trapeze in the evening. They train during the day to get strong, to practice, so they can give brilliant performances. You know, it's a mixture of an art and a sport, I think, really, a lot of circus. But yeah, I have so much time for circus performers. I think they're amazing. And as I said, it's so much fun learning about, you know, how to train dogs, all kinds of things. It was good fun.
All the work that goes into it, and especially, and all of the care that, particularly with Madame Ada and her bees, all of the care she has to take when she's working with and transporting them from place to place. I love the inclusion of the garden.
So well, you see, Méabh, that was really a plot device in a way, because this very nice beekeeper called Ollie kind of was my consultant on the bees. And I said to him, now, Ollie, she needs bees for her act. Can she transport them, like, from England over? Or like, how? And he was going, not really, you know, they'd need a home. They'd need to be somewhere where they can collect their nectar and live. And so he said, I think it's, you know, it's far more realistic actually that they have a home in Dublin and that someone looks after them when she's not there, you know. So that's I gave them their own bee garden, which is on the Quays. Why not? And I actually located it near where the Astley Circus was, which is near the forecourts. So, I mean, no one will know that, but I know that. So it's kind of located quite near where Patty Astley and Philip Astley's circus was. That's where the bee garden is. Yeah.
And like each chapter of the book begins with a brilliant new fact about bees. And even though, like, the novel is set in 1911, like, that message of the importance of bees, that's so much more important now than it would have been then. And how did you go about putting all of that information together? And what, I suppose, what got you interested in bees?
Well, I suppose it was part of Madame Ada's life, the bees. So then I had to go off and research bees, which I did, which was great fun. But then, as you say, I discovered the importance of bees and how important they are in nature. And I became quite obsessed with them for a while. My agent very kindly, I don't know, I have it. No, I don't have it there, but she gave me a tiny little bee brooch that I wear now. But yeah, so those chapter headings actually, interestingly, I don't, if you read the letter, or if you read towards the end of the book, you'll find out what those are. I won't say anymore, just in case people want to read the book. But they were originally written in a kind of modern way, you know, me giving bee facts. But actually then my very clever editor, Helen, said, oh, why don't we make them like 1911 bee facts? You know, kind of in the style of something Eliza would have been reading at the time, which made complete sense. So then we just adjusted them a tiny bit. But I really, so you'll see at the I'll show you one now, but at the beginning, so the illustrations are done by the wonderful Rachel Corcoran, but she also did these lovely chapter headings. You can see there's a tiny bee fact. So this one is a honeybee in flight, can bee should swing. Every chapter has a little bee fact. And I just basically research bees, find my favorite facts. And also, I don't know if anyone will notice, but in some chapters, it's linked to what's in the chapter. But I think you'd have to be a very clued in reader to spot that. Not all of them now, but just some of them are kind of linked to what's in the chapter.
And of course, that time era, so much, as you said earlier, was changing, not just within Ireland, but for women, for children, for worldwide. It's such a time of flux. It's so interesting to look at people right on the cusp of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially for girls and women, I think. I mean, women started being able to vote in 1918, which is a few years after the book is set. The First World War happened from 1914 on. And then I suppose things like girls were only starting to go to college. So the first woman in Trinity was 1904. So again, a lot was happening. And I have Eliza in the Dublin Metropolitan School of Art, that's the college. At the very beginning of the book, she has to leave because she has to work for her father on her father's business instead. And she thinks this is really unfair. All she wants to be an artist. But there's a fantastic photo I found from 1913 of a group of young women from the Dublin Metropolitan School of Art, and they're posing with a skeleton. Such a great picture. Yeah, I do recommend anyone to go and find it online. If you put in 1913 women, Dublin Metropolitan School of Art, you'll find it. But it really, I look at that picture a lot because I think, well, what brave young women they were to go completely against convention and to decide, not only am I going to go to college, I'm going to go to art college. Now, they would have been middle class women because, it wasn't, you had to pay to go. But still, brave women. So I kind of saw Eliza like that, kind of brave young woman. Maybe a bit like kind of the Eight Sisters, Lily and Lolly, or Kathleen Lynn, who set up St. Alton's, the Children's Hospital. She had that same kind of drive and determination.
Yes, because she is such a passionate and determined character, and particularly about her art. She wants to, she is constantly I loved how she's constantly seeing the world through kind of ideas for pictures. She's seeing she experiences the circus and immediately wants to recreate it. And it's so in her art, and it's just such a lovely thing. And I love how she shared that passion with other characters like her friend Annie, who they talk about their own ambitions as women and what she wants for the world and the things that they want to be and everything. I love that it showcased all of these ambitions that these girls would have, no matter what the era it is that they're coming from.
But I thought it was important as well that Annie pointed out that Eliza's ambitions were reachable. She could be an artist, but Annie's weren't. I won't tell you what Annie's are, but they're just unfortunately not really. But she still had these big dreams, which I thought was wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I created her. I like Annie. So Annie is Eliza's friend in the tenements. She's a little bit older, and she kind of helps Eliza and John T navigate the tenements. Really, she's another kind of almost a mother figure in a way, or a big sister figure. Really. She's like a big sister to Eliza.
But yeah, her experience of the tenements gives you that, again, it's another perspective on the life they're living. And then you've got the family that they go to, the more wealthy family where they get educated with, and you've got their perspective on that. And then what I really enjoyed, that you have the circus, the people of the circus, and they fall into this interesting cross section between all of these different walks of life, because they're kind of outside of everyone. So
They are.
in that sense, they don't belong to any one particular class. And
Yeah.
I thought that made them wonderful characters to have even further outside perspective on what's going on in kind of this part of Dublin at the time.
That's true. And then I suppose you have the Henrietta cottages, which I made up. Actually, it isn't a real place, where life was very difficult, where you have families living in real poverty, no shoes, let alone enough food, and but I thought that was important as well, not to shy away from the fact that there was a lot of poverty and disease in some areas in Dublin at the time. I mean, it was the worst city for poverty, disease, child mortality in the whole of Ireland or Great Britain at the time. So, and one of the worst in Europe, which is not great. But but I mean, with that, you have the sense that there's hope for a lot of families in the tenements because they're so close, they're so smart, and they help each other basically. And I suppose that was one of the messages in the book, that everyone works together, like the bees. That families can be kept safe if everyone works together to do that.
And of course, you yourself are not only an author, you're also an incredible book expert for let's say, for people who really loved Eliza's story and The Little Bee Charmer. Would there be any other books that you would recommend that they might really enjoy, both non-fiction and fiction?
I suppose the Judy Curtin Lissadell stories. Judy's a great friend of mine, and the Lissadell, there's a third one out in October called Lily's Dream, and they are terrific. The first one's Lily at Lissadell, and they're about a young girl. I think she's around 12 or 13, and she leaves school to become a maid in the big house in Lissadell, and she becomes friends with one of the other maids and with the daughter of the house. Really, really great, really lovely friendship and family kind of stories. And then I suppose the Molly books as well from Anna Carey that I mentioned before. And the other writer I really like who writes historic fiction is Emma Carroll. I don't know if you've read Letters from a Light, and she has a new one called A Week at World's End, which is set around the Cold War, which is such a good book and such an interesting story. I work on Saturdays in halfway up the stairs, children's bookshop in Greystones, and I love chatting to the young customers, and there's so much interest in history in young readers in Ireland. And this isn't all that common. I don't think people realize how unusual this is. In England, it's very much a side genre almost to fantasy and things. In Ireland, like, the kids love history books.
Love it. It's the thing that I
as well, Méabh, in your shop.
Completely. I keep saying again and again the things that I want to come out of publishers are more historical novels, particularly more historical novels that focus on girls, more historical novel. You're so taking boxes here. Historical novels that aren't necessarily about big historical events, like historical novels more talking about like an individual's life as well. I think there's such, kids love I find it coming into me as well, always love reading about history, love reading about Irish history, definitely. There's a real interest in Irish history, and I suppose I feel like when I was a young reader, I had the benefit of the likes of Cora Harrison and Yvonne McGrory, Mary Arrigan, all writing these wonderful historical novels about.
And of course, we had Marita Conlon McKenna.
Marita Conlon McKenna. I mean, that kind of classic of the genre, like that. All of them writing these wonderful historical that literally gave you that window into history that that interest that I still have today. So,
and in the shop, Méabh, do you have any particular ones that you recommend or love, or what are your kind of go-to titles for?
I really love. You mentioned Lily at Lissadell. I really love that. And of course, I love Anna Carey's newest one,
Oh yeah,
The
Betty.
Boldness of Betty.
Yeah,
I just love her personality so much.
great. Yeah.
That's one that I really enjoy. I really like Brian Gallagher's ones as well.
Yeah.
And then for the kids that are really into history, I tend to send them to Nicola Pierce.
Yes,
Because
of course.
Nicola
Iconic,
Pierce has so
yeah.
many details in her books, and
They're
they're
terrific.
so meticulously researched and everything. So they're all like ones that I personally really love sending kids to. And then of course,
And is there any period of history that we as writers should be looking at, Maeve, that there's gaps in the market? You have to let us know.
I suppose it becomes harder the further back you go, because the less information you have. Personally, I'd love to see ones about kind of the Norman invasion. I know there was, because the last one I can think of is Strongbow, like Morgan Llewellyn's Strongbow, which came out a good while ago. I'd love to see more stories about that period of change in Ireland.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of Viking stories. There's, people have looked, and then there's kind of like a lot of stories post-plantation with kind of like looking at Granuaile and kind of but I feel like that era where things were changing, Ireland was being put kind of essentially claimed by Henry II, but you still had a lot of things going on, and there it still wasn't fully taken. I think it would be a really, I personally, I think that'd be a really interesting era to read a book about if someone was, writing just for me.
Might be one you need to write, Maeve. I think you sound like you have.
But I think I think more historical novels definitely is something that I think the Irish market definitely would be very happy. I think the Irish kids. But I think that's pretty much all my questions there. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Maeve, and thank you for Charlie Byrne for all the support for the book.